If we read enough blogs and watch enough videos about Appalachian Trail hikers, we'll find multiple accounts of physical ailments or injuries that either caused noticeable discomfort or forced someone off the trail. At least a couple of times I've read the testimony of someone who hiked the entire trail and admitted they were walking with pain most of the time. Some injuries are at such a level that they require seeing a medical doctor as soon as possible. This video is not about those situations. Instead, we'll look at more minor issues, the kind that a backpacker will keep hiking with, at least temporarily, either by choice or necessity, or because they aren't sure what else to do. When a hiker has pain, I will not second guess them if they leave the trail or keep hiking. Only they will understand exactly what the problem feels like. If the problem is extreme, I think anyone will accept that they have to stop. And a small problem might turn extreme if it gets worse and worse every day. If we take time off, the problem might improve quickly or it might not. For the record, even with minor issues, there's no substitute for seeing a medical doctor. Nothing I will say here is intended to replace the expertise of a physician. Yet I have seen that some common elements often exist when it comes to pain, soreness, and/or injury when hiking on the AT, or when thinking about hiking on it. These will be our topics. Up front, I have to say I have no easy answers or guarantees because there are none. Even so, my experience has shown me steps can be taken to reduce the odds of such problems in the first place. We'll talk about that later. One common element is the trail itself and its conditions. Other common elements can include something we thought was not a problem, but it turns into a problem. They can include making a mistake or suffering a mishap that produces immediate and unpleasant results. They can include the decision or the need to keep hiking when something is wrong and how to cope with it. They can include trying to recover from an injury so we can return to hiking. They can include trying to maintain a positive attitude when recovering from such an injury. I have experienced each of these and we'll look at what happened. In another video, I told how the AT is an uncommonly hazardous environment when it comes to the risk of creating pain in feet, knees, and other parts of the leg anatomy. The link's in the description. That's because hundreds of miles on the AT are covered by rocks of all sizes, and those rocks force our feet and legs into positions we would never encounter if we walked only on smooth and flat trail. Depending on how hard we land and what we land on, falling down on rocks is a hazard. If we walk down steep AT hills too quickly, it easily can create discomfort or worse in our knees, as many have learned. This piece of trail was, for me, another reminder that sure footing cannot be taken for granted on the AT. When I hit this spot on my last section hike, my feet flew out from under me and down I went. If anybody's interested in testing their hiking IQ, I suggest hitting pause to see if you can spot the reason I fell. For those with no patience for such riddles, allow me to help. Inside these red circles are acorns. Some are green and some are brown. This photo shows about 4 feet of trail, and I counted about 65 acorns in this photo. When my feet hit these things, I slid like I was on ball bearings. In fact, I nearly fell again when I stood back up before I understood the fall was in fact an acorn attack. That fall caused me no physical issues, but that's always a risk anytime we fall. I've earlier told how I had a limp in my right leg for 2 years after a head-on car accident. For 2 years, I was walking with a slight crouch in my left leg to compensate for the limp in the right. When a surgery finally corrected the limp, I noticed a discomfort in my left foot. A doctor told me it seemed to have a slightly fallen arch. He suggested insoles. I started walking almost daily in anticipation of my next section hike, and my left foot soon seemed back to normal. That did not last. When I returned to the AT, it was far from normal. By about day 3, walking on the trail's rocks made the foot feel worse than it ever had. I tried to baby the foot as best I could on the rocks and kept going. On flat trail, the foot didn't seem too bad. The situation was not disabling, but it was far from pleasant. After the hike, I returned to the doctor and told him what happened. By then, I had experimented with different kinds of shoes. I told him nothing seemed to help as much as shoes with almost completely rigid soles. And now we arrive at what is the only possible lesson from this sad tale. When I told the doctor about the rigid soles, he said, "Oh yes, rigid soles make a very big difference." When I heard that, I could have jumped up on my one good foot and yelled, "Why didn't you tell me that before I went to the AT?" Because I tried to be logical about personal education, shall we say, I took this as a lesson. I should have asked earlier for every possible option to protect that foot. I already had learned that if I just sat there and tell a doctor, "Well, okay," to whatever he says, that's not always the best idea. One example. My daughter became ill when she was an infant. My now ex-wife took her to a doctor who said the baby had a cold. My ex-wife, to put it bluntly, threw a fit. She argued the baby was too sick for it to be a cold. The doctor caved in and ordered a test that showed my daughter had pneumonia. Sometimes such a protest, if inspired by evidence and logical thinking, has merits. One likely exception, in my experience, is if a doctor tells us something is really bad. They are very unlikely to say such a thing unless they have hard evidence to back it up, in my experience. At the moment, the foot is improving with the help of rigid soles. I told the doc I wanted to see what improvement was possible before seeing a specialist. He endorsed that plan. On that same hike, I developed another problem, and this one was all my fault. This photo shows a rock at a shelter, positioned as a step. I was alone during my stay here, and I entered the shelter at the other end, which had no step. Much later, after dark, I walked to the other side and stepped down on this rock. Because I failed to turn on a light, I thought the rock was about 10 inches taller than it really was. So, my right leg hit the rock like a ton of bricks, and I fell. As near as I can tell, that fall strained a muscle along the shin, called the tibialis anterior. After that, my right leg felt as lousy as my left foot. Every morning, that muscle was as stiff as a board until I limped around to limber it up. The next day, I figured out a trick to help the leg. Most people, when using two trekking poles, place each pole on the ground with alternating steps. By changing that rhythm, I found I could place a pole on the ground every time my right leg touched the ground. This relieved the load on that leg every time I took a step, and it helped a lot. I have section hiked a number of times in a number of years. I believe that if I had trained a whole year before that latest hike, the right leg might not have been bothered at all by that step out of the shelter. I say that because I've seen how hard training toughens up legs and feet and almost everything else. We've all heard the stories from those who finished a through hike and said they never trained in advance. Evidence suggests those folks are exceptions to the law of averages, and here are those averages according to the AT Conservancy. Every year, most people will not complete their through hike attempt. One who did was Emma Gatewood. This book tells that before leaving home for her first through hike at age 67, she was walking 10 miles every day. And that's what I call serious. Gatewood was serious about the hike, and her preparation paid off. The common advice is to start slow on the AT, and it's good advice. It will help, but it's not a guarantee, as many have learned. Trekking poles are no guarantee either, but they have prevented many falls for me and make uphill climbing easier. I will not backpack on the AT without them. Even with poles, I watch the trail in front of me almost all the time. Before I learned that habit, I would smash toes into rocks or trip over rocks. And let's not forget those acorns. Blisters are a very common problem I have discussed repeatedly. I have found an approach that pretty much prevents blisters for me. See the description for more about that. If we have any kind of physical problem before the hike, we need to take it seriously, which I failed to do with my left foot. One mistake, like my step out of that shelter, can create trouble. Some creative thinking, like changing my rhythm with the trekking poles, might help at least a little. Another example is knee wraps. Some folks who experience knee trouble on the AT manage to buy knee wraps or bands during their hike. Some carry them at the start of the hike, just in case. And some who use them say the problem cleared up after wearing them for a while. See the description for a link on knee pain while hiking. We are in a difficult spot if we love to hike on the AT, but we suffered a bad injury off the trail. it might be many months before we heal up and can hike again. In my case, it was more than 3 years because I was in a head-on car wreck. The day before that wreck, I could run up the stairs of a 3-story building 2 steps at a time. At the time, I thought, no matter what else is going on, I can still walk like a champ. But the car wreck changed all that. When I crawled out of the wreckage, my right hip hurt bad. I complained about this to the EMTs, the emergency room doc, and my own physician. They all decided the hip wasn't broken, and they shrugged it off. 3 weeks after the wreck, my doctor ordered an x-ray to be sure there was no fracture. Months went by with no improvement. Eventually, my limp got worse, and I noticed my right leg was now about a half-inch shorter than the left. I was convinced my backpacking career was finished. I thought of my father. His right leg was amputated after a car wreck. That didn't keep him away from the outdoors. He went deer hunting on crutches. He hiked with my scouting group on a trip of several days, wearing an artificial leg and pulling a bunch of gear on a cart another guy had made. I figured I was still in better shape than he had been, and I had nothing to whine about. 2 years after the accident, my doctor retired and I went to a new one. This guy took one look at the x-ray taken after the wreck, and he said, "You need a hip replacement." That did not sound like fun at all, but I was desperate to walk right again. I took it as a cause for hope. It took a year to recover from the surgery, and then I did backpack again on the AT. When we face such a situation, I don't know what any of us can do except deal with it as best as we can and hope we're getting good help. I have a friend in his mid-40s. This guy needs both of his hips replaced because of a degenerative condition. This was troubling news for him, so much so that his doctor eventually put him on a mild anti-anxiety prescription, and he's still on it. We had a long talk, and he told me he was helped by the concept of neuroplasticity with the goal of redirecting unconscious thought. In particular, he liked a book written by a guy named John Barg. The link's in the description. My friend said the idea of surgery still bothers him, and I don't blame him. If we need a surgery like that, my advice is don't go watching any videos of the procedure online. There are better things we can pay attention to, in my opinion. I don't think my friend has ever had a surgery, but since the age of 8, I've had 6 of the things for various reasons, and I hope I don't have to have a 7th. But I did live through them and agree each was necessary. And now we're once again done. Please subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Thanks to all my loyal viewers, and thanks to everyone for watching.